Hello, everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast on True Story FM. I'm Pete Wright, and I'm here with Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Pete Wright.
Hi, Nikki. How are you? How's your brain?
It's going to get smarter.
It's going to get smarter.
I just know it.
So our guest is awesome and is sitting quietly because I haven't actually introduced her yet. I'm going to say the question that I want her to answer. And I'm going to say it because I know she'll want to answer it right away because it's the only question I'm sure anybody ever asks. Is an ADHD brain squishier than a regular brain? Like in your hand? I want to know the answer to that.
Maybe.
Nope, you can't answer yet. That was a test. It was a test. I trolled you. Okay,
no.
Here we go. I'm very excited to get to this conversation. We're talking about executive function as we age, continuing our series. And today, we're talking brain stuff, and I'm very, very excited about it. But before we get into the show, I want to tell you about our Patreon community, because if you're a regular listener, this might just be your next stop. Members get early, ad-free access to every one of the episodes. They get access to member-only channels in our Discord server, and they get a seat in the live stream. You can join us and watch as we record, and you can ask questions of our guests at the end of the show. That's a member-only thing nobody else gets access to. Plus, we throw in special events along the way all the time. But honestly, the thing we hear people talk about most isn't any of that. It's the community itself. This is a group of real amazing people, all living with ADHD, who show up for each other in a way that is pretty hard to describe and find anywhere else. If you have ever wanted to be more than just a listener, this is where it happens. Visit patreon.com/the ADHD podcast to learn more and join us. And if you're not ready to do any of the joining yet, that's just fine. You can find us on takecontroladhd.com, connect with us on socials, join us in the free part of our Discord, or sign up for the weekly email. We would love to have you wherever you land. Our guest is Dr. Brandy Callahan, a clinical neuropsychologist, associate professor of psychology at the University of Calgary, and a Canada Research Chair in Adult Clinical Neuropsychology. She's founder and principal investigator of the LiBra Lab, the Lifespan Brain Health Lab, which focuses specifically on ADHD in women and in older adulthood. Her current research is investigating the mechanisms that may drive elevated dementia risk in adults with ADHD, including the role of brain health, physiological stress, and what a lifetime of navigating this kind of brain may actually cost us biologically. She is the person who's trying to answer the question this series has been building toward. Dr. Callahan, welcome to the ADHD podcast. You may now answer the squishy brain question.
Thank you so much for having me. I like to imagine that an ADHD brain is maybe squishier than a regular brain. I don't know. What do you think?
I love that. I love that. Oh my gosh. I imagine it just bouncing around up there. Who even knows? We are so glad you are here today. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the LiBra Lab. This is explicitly about brain health across time. Yes, not just clinical snapshots.
So the idea of the LiBra Lab, the Lifespan Brain Health Lab, is to try to understand basically how brains age, right? So I'm a geriatric neuropsychologist. I'm interested in sort of how people experience brain aging, both normally and also looking at things like dementia. But to understand how people develop dementia, how they experience aging, you sort of have to look at the rest of their life, what's happened to them in, their 20s and 30s and 40s. So we that's exactly what we do. We basically look at how lifespan factors impact how people age. And for the last, I'll say probably 9 or 10 years, I've been focusing specifically on ADHD. Although actually my background is not in ADHD, my background is in dementia research. And how I got interested in ADHD is that I was working at a place where there was an affiliated memory clinic, and people were being referred to the memory clinic for dementia workup because they were experiencing, cognitive changes that they were worried were dementia. And we started essentially, asking them to describe the history of these changes. And through this clinical interview, we realized, a lot of these changes have been around for a long time, your whole life. And we realized that
Oh,
a lot of
no.
these people had undiagnosed ADHD. Um, and so at that time, I became really interested in the question of like, well, what do we actually know about people, who used to be kids with ADHD and now are, 50 and 60-year-olds with ADHD. And I realized that there's almost no information out there. So that became sort of my little passion project, and it's become my career. So that's what I do now.
You don't have ADHD yourself, right?
I do not know. Not that I know of.
Just a fan.
Just a fan.
Just a fan.
I'm
Okay.
not a fan too.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to make sure I know who I'm talking to. I know where I am. I'm living with the ADHD. You too. Okay. This is very telling. Plain English. We talk to a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists and practicing therapists. What does a neuropsychologist actually do day to day?
Ah, yes, good question. So a neuropsychologist is a subspecial, like neuropsychology is a subspecialty of clinical psychology. So, I followed the same clinical psychology training as a quote unquote regular psychologist. Um, but the neuro piece means that I did some additional training in cognitive testing and brain behavior relationships. So, what a neuropsychologist does in their day to day is try to use different, usually pen and paper tests, to try and understand what is going on in the brain, because we know that certain performance on specific kinds of tests should should reflect activity and functioning in specific brain areas. So basically, a clinical neuropsychologist will spend usually a few hours. Usually, a neuropsychological assessment is quite thorough and quite long. So, usually, a neuropsychologist will spend a few hours with a client administering various tests and try to understand from performance on those tests, where the person is experiencing weaknesses, what are their strengths. And so, a neuropsychological assessment is usually performed when there's some suspicion of some sort of brain abnormality. So again, in my experience, it's usually been older people who are worried they may be in the beginning stages of dementia. So they'll come in and we'll do testing with them there to determine that. But you also might undergo a neuropsychological test if you have had a concussion, or if you've been having strange symptoms and your doctor suspects something like a something neurodegenerative, or there's lots of reasons you might undergo a neuropsych test.
Okay. So it seems like as we're aging, where those, let's say, blips in our cognitive performance are going to show up in a place that ADHDers live, which is in executive functioning. I'm making some assumptions there, but that's my understanding.
That
Okay,
is a correct
nailing it.
assumption. Yes.
So we also know that executive function is not just one thing. It's working memory. We've talked about memory with Dr. Daniela Caridi. Inhibitory control. We know it's cognitive flexibility. It's being able to juggle a lot of things. From your perspective, how do these elements of our executive function age differently from one another, or do they?
Yeah. So the I don't know if I would actually call this an executive function, but processing speed. Well, it's not an executive function, but it is. Your processing speed is controlled by some of the same sort of brain substrates as executive function, so the frontal lobes. Um, and processing speed is where we see sort of the most notable declines with age. So people just generally get slower at thinking and doing things. And that's pretty normal. We also see, things that decline with age are things like multitasking or controlling attention. So people may become a little bit more distracted as they get older, or people might have difficulty doing two things at once or switching from one task to another. Um, but but really what we see is in healthy aging is that if you give people enough time, they usually are just as accurate as when they were young, right? So it's this trade-off of speed and accuracy where, accuracy remains the same as long as you give people more time to do things. Whereas when we're young, we can usually be pretty accurate and pretty fast.
That's hopeful to me. I feel like that's really hopeful, and because what it says, assuming we're not dealing with a sort of neurodegenerative condition, that ADHD symptoms are not effectively necessarily changing. Like, I already have systems in place to help me with my ADHD symptoms, and those systems
Yeah. Yeah.
should
I think as
continue to function.
a rule of thumb, if you're, kind to yourself and you continue working using those strategies and those mechanisms and give yourself, the time and the space to carry out, whatever you're trying to do, then we're still learning a lot about how ADHD is experienced by people over the age of 40. Really, we don't know very much, but the evidence that we do have suggests that in normal aging, ADHD symptoms themselves, shouldn't really get worse. Although you mentioned something really interesting, which is strategies and coping mechanisms. Those, can change as we get older, just by virtue of the fact that our environment is changing. So, as one example, um, I mentioned earlier that how I became interested in ADHD was older adults were being referred for dementia workups, essentially. And one of the things that we were hearing a lot is, yes, I've been having I've had some of these problems for a long time, but really I noticed it got a lot worse when I retired. Right. And so that is one example of when you're in a job that has very clear expectations and you're held accountable to someone and you have a schedule and you have built-in sort of um, uh, mechanisms to ensure that you're getting things done. You have to meet deadlines. You don't want to get fired. When that is those mechanisms and those structures, when they fall away after a person retires, that can lead to changes in ADHD symptoms, right? They may sort of pop up where they weren't popping up before, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Because it feels like when you're really busy, you're able to kind of figure out how to fit in the things that you have to figure out. But when you have a full open day, you don't really know what to do.
Yeah, exactly right.
My
Yeah,
distraction
exactly
will
right.
fill available hours.
Mhm.
Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
Which is why I think there's I don't know, it sounds misleading to say, my ADHD is getting worse as I age. And I have said this, right? Like, I hit my 50s, I was like, well, here it is. My ADHD is getting worse. But I'm just getting older, and changing is really the more apt, it sounds like the more apt description of my day-to-day experience.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that reminds me of I was at a community event a few years ago, and I was like at this booth, and we were talking about the research we're doing, and this older woman came up to me, and she said in a very frustrated tone, she said, I can't do any of the things I used to do when I was younger, and I'm having trouble remembering things, and I'm always forgetting my words, and I sort of what I thought was I thought I was being reassuring by saying to her, "Oh, that's just normal. That's normal aging." And she looked at me with like daggers in her eyes
How
and she said,
dare
"I
you,
don't
madam?
care if it's." She looked at me with daggers in her eyes and she said, "I don't care if it's normal. It's difficult, and I it sucks and I hate it." And
Yeah.
that was really a sort of a poignant moment for me because I was like, she's right. I mean, getting older, things change in a very normal way. But does it just because it's normal doesn't mean it's fun.
Right,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right.
I've been thinking so much. We have a regular guest, Dr. Dodge Ray's therapist out of Nashville, and he has this thing. He says, look, it sucks. It's not your fault, but it is yours, right? It's
Mm.
not, none of this is your fault, but it is yours to live with. And
Mhm.
once we, that sort of layer of acceptance
Mm.
is applied to whatever the sort of emergence of our conditions are as we age, I think it becomes easier to accept. It becomes easier to acknowledge that this is my reality, and it's different from when I was 20, and
Yeah.
that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit. Let's chart the decades. Yeah, you said we don't know very much, but we do know some things. So what does the research actually look like, looking at sort of executive function trajectories for adults with ADHD across 40s, 50s, 60s, and onward?
Yeah, I don't know actually if I can answer that question with evidence because there have been only a small handful of studies measuring cognitive functioning, including executive functions, in people with ADHD over the age of 40. In that small handful of studies, a lot of them were mine, my own studies, and I can say that even the studies that I have done, I think were limited in some important ways. And I think so we're redesigning the studies. We're trying to, get better at how we do them. But we don't really have a lot of information. Most of the recent literature the scientific literature that has been published about, age-related outcomes linked to ADHD has not actually measured cognition. It's been basically these have been studies that have been done on population using population register data. So mostly looking at basically people's medical records. And if a person has a medical record, a diagnosis of ADHD recorded in their chart, what else do they have going on, right? What other health conditions do they have? What health conditions are they likely to develop over time as they age? So we do know there's some emerging evidence that is still very new, but seems to be pretty robust that unfortunately ADHD is a risk factor for some poor aging outcomes. We talked about dementia. So these population register studies do suggest that a person with a diagnosis of ADHD, if you follow them over time, is more likely than people without an ADHD diagnosis to have a subsequent diagnosis of dementia in their medical chart. But again, we don't have any measurements of cognitive outcomes per se. So it's hard for me to say. I'll say that in the research that we've done, one thing I'll say actually about ADHD specifically, and I think this is important to note, is that the executive difficulties that people with ADHD report to us very clearly do not align very well with the measurements of executive function that we collect in the lab. So I'll give one example of
What
this.
say what now?
Yes, yes. And it seems paradoxical, but I think it makes sense when you think about what ADHD is and what our tests measure. So just to elaborate on what I mean, my research participants with ADHD will tell me, I'm a terrible planner. I'm so disorganized. I can't keep track of any, I start one thing, I lose track of the other thing. So what it sounds like they're describing to me is difficulty multitasking, difficulty planning, and difficulty with organization. When we bring them into the lab and we sit them down and we administer neuropsychological tests that are supposed to measure planning, multitasking, and organization, a lot of our participants do fine, actually. And when you think about why this might, and this is not just in my lab, this is a very well-documented phenomenon in the ADHD literature. We see it in kids and young adults and older adults. And when you think about what ADHD is, or I'll tell you what cognitive testing is, what neuropsych testing is we bring people in to a quiet room with no distractions, a novel test that's pretty interesting, clear instructions. They do fine,
Yeah.
right?
But there's
And
no world there, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's not the real world, right? And so So that's one thing that I think we need to think about when I'm trying to answer the question of what do executive functions look like as people get older with ADHD. Well, the answer is in most of our studies, fine. but
Yeah.
but actually, in almost all the studies that I have run personally, I can't see any measurable executive deficits on the group level. So again, we test groups of people and we average their scores and we say, how's the group performing? There is quite a bit of inter-individual variability. So some people are doing a lot better or worse than others. But on the whole, on average, most of the research that I have done and most of the research that I'm aware of, with a few exceptions, does not show any measurable deficits or difficulties in executive function in adults with ADHD.
Have you considered actually holding the tests in a grocery store like aisle 5 Sunday afternoon around 3:30?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because in my research studies, we give feedback to our participants. So they do the testing and then they come back and we sort of share with them what we've learned about them. And a lot of them have gotten quite frustrated with me
Oh,
when I
yeah.
say, good news, actually, clean bill of cognitive health. And I say, what do you mean clean bill of
Yeah.
cognitive health? Like, I am struggling, lady.
Right.
So yeah, I don't think that what we're seeing on our tests means that people with ADHD don't have executive difficulties. I don't think that's true at all. I just think that the way that we measure these tests is the way that we measure these abilities, the tests that we have measure your optimal performance under optimal conditions. And that's good news that under optimal conditions, you know, things can
You're
go
able
well.
to
Yeah,
Well, at
perform.
least
yeah,
it's
yeah.
illustrative that I
I
could create optimal conditions at my house sometimes and be
Yeah,
right.
better at
yeah.
stuff. So I'm sorry, Nikki, go ahead.
I have a question around the emotional dysregulation around ADHD, because I think that sometimes you may be able to do the executive function, but you feel horrible doing it. And
Yeah.
that's part of, this shame cycle that we see with so many ADHDers. And from my understanding, and you're going to know this much better than I would, the emotional piece doesn't get studied either.
No, we're not. That's actually something that that I've become really interested recently. So that's something that our group will be looking at. But you're right that um, usually studies of cognition
Yeah,
look at
right.
cognition,
Right.
right? And not a lot else. But I think there are lots of experiences that are maybe not unique to ADHD, but that are definitely a part of ADHD that I don't think we're doing a great job of measuring. So I know you had an episode recently on masking. Like
Mhm.
that's something, right? Where you can maybe do a thing, but the energy that it takes and just the resources that the cognitive and emotional resources that you need to put in to appear like you're able to do the thing that everyone else is able to do so much more easily, that's not something that I think has gotten a lot of research attention.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I'm so glad you're here because it gives me an excuse to start using just some big words that I don't really know what they mean. And one of the things that stuck out to me in your research is allostatic burden. And not because that
Mm.
means anything to me in and of itself, but my understanding of what it is saying is that a lifetime of neurological stress may accumulate as a non-trivial biological cost. Is that that's a fair
Yes.
assessment?
That is a fair assessment, and that's something that we're looking at right now. We just are wrapping up probably next week or the week after a research study looking at exactly that. Um, so allostatic load refers to basically the cumulative sort of wear and tear on your physical body from exposure to chronic stress. Um, And
I think this gets to exactly why I'm so excited about Nikki's question, right? Because doesn't that define the kind of generalized stress that people living with ADHD have in their lives almost all the time?
well, so that's exactly why we're looking at allostatic burden as a marker of interest in ADHD. To my knowledge, it's not been studied before, but something that we were seeing in one of my previous research studies is that basically it seemed like, um, and I'm hesitant to sort of put too much weight on this because we're having a little bit of trouble sort of replicating this finding, but other groups have shown it as well. So it seems like a little tiny bit of brain pathology, so brain damage, age-related brain damage, in ADHD seems to have much more sort of devastating consequences than to a non-ADHD brain. So in other words, there seems to be, again, tentatively, this is like in 2 or 3 studies, there seems to be something about the ADHD brain that makes it more vulnerable to certain types of age-related brain pathology. And I had the hypothesis, this is why we're studying allostatic load, is maybe your brain, an ADHD brain, is more vulnerable to age-related changes because of chronic exposure to stress. And this idea is coming from the fact that, as you alluded to earlier, navigating a neurotypical world with a neurodivergent brain is really hard from what I hear from the people that we work with. It's difficult. There's a lot of sort of stress that comes with masking, that comes with having to work harder than other people to do the same job. And also we'll say that, again, I'm talking about group level trends here, but we know that as a group, people with ADHD are exposed to all kinds of other stressors as well. So more financial stress, more job instability, more relationship stress, all kinds of things like that are sort of added on. So we're basically exploring this idea that maybe living with ADHD for 6 or 7 decades, these are the people that we're studying who are older and who've been living with ADHD for many, many decades. Maybe 6 decades of stress of being a neurodivergent person in a neurotypical world maybe is making your brain more vulnerable to certain brain changes.
How does that duration of living with ADHD confound the cognitive testing? Because I imagine people who have been living with ADHD compensating for so long, you dropped masking on us, so I have to kind of probe that. Like, people who've been masking with their ADHD for so long may not sort of be amenable to capturing what's actually happening in daily life, right? Like, what kind of assessment captures through to what somebody who is habituated chronic stress just feels like Monday? That's just life.
Are you talking about how we measure the stress?
How do you study that stress when people may not even notice the stress anymore, just the dysfunction?
Yeah, we're measuring biological markers of stress. So we're collecting people's blood, we're taking samples of their hair to look at cortisol in their hair. So we do have like blood markers of inflammation and of sort of like metabolic indicators and things like that. But you're right, people may not realize their stress because that's sort of their baseline.
Yeah, I mean, I know day to day I'm an unreliable narrator about my own condition, right? I'm not a good documentarian of my own experience.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. So I think that's why we feel pretty strongly in my research group that we need sort of we need to complement people's self-report, of their experiences with more sort of quantifiable measures of what's going on in their body.
So someone's listening to this in their 40s, maybe 50s. What is an important step to sort of coming to understand their relationship with ADHD as they age? Like, is there a case for establishing some sort of, like, going in for testing, establishing some sort of neuropsychological baseline to understand where you're starting as you age?
Yeah. I mean,
not that I need you to be diagnostic here, but I'm curious.
Yeah, well, 40s and 50s is a tricky time, actually, because there's a lot, particularly for women, there's a lot going on in
For
40s
sure.
and 50s. And that's something, again, that my group is really, really interested in right now is this, that transitional, like hormonal period of perimenopause leading into menopause where, there's lots of stuff happening. And
Lots of stuff.
yeah, lots of stuff.
I understand that.
Yeah, lots going on. And it's there are, there's emerging it's a very hot topic right now in ADHD is how menopause impacts ADHD related outcomes. Um there's some emerging evidence that women with ADHD may experience like exacerbated menopause relative to women without ADHD. So like more brain fog, more emotional dysregulation.
And can I just say to those people, I am so sorry.
Yes, I know. Same. I mean, it's not fun.
No, and like you said earlier, it's like you can normalize it all you want, but it's still not fun. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard.
So, and it's tricky because there's so many things like we started the podcast talking about executive functioning. One of the most important neurotransmitters in the brain that supports executive functioning is dopamine. And dopamine and estrogen work really closely together, where estrogen enhances the efficacy of dopamine, right? So more estrogen, more dopamine, clearer thinking, better mood. So I think it makes a lot of sense to assume that perimenopause or like hormonal transition periods could be more difficult for women with ADHD because we know that dopamine signaling is abnormal in ADHD. So there is already this idea that abnormal dopamine signaling is impacting emotional dysregulation and cognition in ADHD at its core. And then you add in declines in estrogen, and dopamine is even less able to support cognition and mood. So I think, I think it's a tough time can be a tough time for women with ADHD. So putting that aside, I think, maybe, for people who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s with ADHD, I think recognizing, as we talked about, that aging is happening. It's not your fault, but it's yours, as you said earlier.
Mhm.
And I think trying to be kind to yourself and letting yourself more time and more space to get things done, and sort of managing your expectations about what, things should look like or what you should be accomplishing. And also, I think being open to shifting strategies, as we talked about, becoming, perimenopausal, transitioning through retirement, those things that are happening sort of in the periphery of, someone already living with ADHD can change the effectiveness of previous coping strategies and can, require a person to maybe shift gears and maybe try something new. I think I wouldn't, um, I think talking to your doctor about, you know, going in for a neuropsychological assessment probably is most warranted if you are worried about your cognition because, as I said, like, most people with ADHD, or many people, shouldn't say most, many people with ADHD will do fine on a neuropsychological test. So, in that sense, cognitive testing is not necessarily very informative to tell you anything about your ADHD. But I think if you're worried that maybe something else might be going on, you feel like maybe your cognition, your memory, for example, is worse than people of say similar age as you, or worse than you think it should be, then I think it's always a good idea to, talk to your doctor about those concerns and they can do some screening. And
I
usually
think that
I'll just add that I think usually the first step, by the way, is asking your family doctor, and then your doctor will do like a screening test to sort of gauge, like, is there any evidence that there's anything wrong? And then if the screening suggests that there may be some weaknesses, then usually you're referred for like a full neuropsych assessment.
I think that that's really great advice because especially when you're in your 40s and 50s, we feel like it could be worst case scenario. But I know for me personally, once I got my blood work done and my doctor said, this is what's going on. Okay, now it all starts to make sense. And we went through how can I treat this, knowing that it's not dementia. It's not, it is the perimenopause, menopause hormonal shift.
Mhm, mhm.
And so it does, I mean, I think knowledge too, just understanding what's happening to your body makes such a difference to know you're not going crazy. You're not like, it is, there's reasons for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like we always, I think like a really good rule of thumb to like protect your brain health as you get older with or without ADHD is whatever's good for your heart health is good for your brain health. So protecting your, managing hypertension if you have hypertension or diabetes, making sure those things are controlled, high cholesterol, making sure all of those things are well controlled, getting enough sleep and good exercise and just generally eating healthy. Because like what feeds your brain is your heart, right? Your heart
Mhm.
pumps oxygenated blood to your brain. And if you don't have a healthy heart, you don't have a healthy brain. And a lot of very good quality research supports this, that taking care of your heart health is the best way to support brain health.
I
Good
I
to know.
I think that is such great advice because my next question was, do you ever have good news for people? Because it seems like there's a lot of good. Yeah, like when you look at the people who are most successful in mitigating the experience of decline in their executive functioning skills and their just sort of um, their their lives in their skin with their brain, what are those things? And it sounds like, okay, I can handle my physiology. I can continue to keep my heart healthy. Those things I can do. What else do you see people doing who are able to live a healthy life with some hope?
I'll say that research supports also being mentally active. So, this could mean like crossword puzzles and Sudoku. Like that's typically, I think, what people think of when they think of brain, keeping your brain active. But it could be something like, learning how to knit or going salsa dancing if you don't know how to salsa dance, like learning
New
new
things.
steps, learning anything new, learning a new language or I don't know how motivated people are to learn a new language in their 60s, but learning anything new and exposing yourself to new things and getting outside your comfort zone is generally thought to be pretty good. And I'll say this is totally anecdotal. There might be research to support this, but I don't know of it. But anecdotally, I could say that I've worked with a lot of older people, and the older people that I see who are very successfully aging have a totally different way of thinking about aging. So to them, an older person is not some decrepit old white-haired, frail, they see aging as an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for flourishing. My own grandmother actually is a perfect example of this. She's 95 or 96, and up until relatively recently, she was volunteering um as like a caregiver to what she called an old person who was 20 years younger than her. And she would say, "Oh yeah, gotta go help out my old man." And he was literally like 15 or 20 years younger than her, but she saw herself and continues to see herself, I think, as someone who's young at heart, who, still can learn new things and says yes to lots of new things. So I think that's a really, just having a positive outlook on aging and seeing aging as an opportunity for, you know, more growth, lifelong growth.
It's a blessing. I mean, right? Like that's what I think of every time that I have a birthday. I'm like, I'm glad I'm here. Like I'm glad I'm here because there's other people that don't get to don't get to this birthday.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to see that I'm glad you bring that up. I think that's so important, that positive mindset and just looking for the joy. And
it's one of the things that came up in a conversation we had last week with Dr. Kathleen Nadeau. She was giving us insights into the research that has changed from when she went through graduate school 50 years ago in what they taught her about the brain. That 50 years ago, we thought you were born with all the brain cells that you could ever possibly have, and it's just a long, slow decline to the end. And I love that you are cementing this because it sounds like flourishing isn't just psychosocial, right? It's physiological. And there's opportunity to make your brain, I'm going to say, more squishy if you just keep engaging in new things. I hadn't considered that. I think I have been challenged that my inner assumption of my brain is that it's all downhill from here. Even though I like to not present that way, I think that's what my inner head voice was saying. And I like being challenged there. That's hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, processing speed is downhill. You will get slower, but that's there's lots of things that stay really strong, and some things that even can improve with age, like our vocabulary and sort of semantic knowledge and all those things even improve with age. So
love it.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you do, because there's obviously this gap that we're missing. I think, so many researchers are doing so much with kids and ADHD, and obviously we're not doing enough for the 40 plus. And I just appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for being here and sharing your knowledge.
Well, thanks so much. This was a great discussion, and I'm glad that we're talking about these things.
Where do you want to point people who want to learn more about your work?
Yeah, you can visit our lab website, which is libralab.ca, all one word, libralab.ca. And you can find out more about the work that we do. We also have a participant registry. So this is a pool of people. If you sign up, you can join our pool of people who wish to be notified about new research that we're doing. Most of the people in my registry are in the Calgary area, so they get invited to all the studies that we run. But we do have some online studies. One that we're actually running right now called ADHD HER, HER. It's a study about girls and women with ADHD across the lifespan. So we're recruiting anyone over the age of 8. So girls from 8 all the way to, I think our oldest participant is 87. So if you want to participate in the ADHD HER study, you can do that. I think you just Google ADHD HER, and it's one of the first things that come up. So it's a survey study online. But that's where you can learn more about me and my research. And happy to connect with anyone who wants to connect with me.
That's outstanding. Thank you so much. Links in the show notes, everybody. And we do have some famed and favorite Canadian members in our community, and they will undoubtedly be looking you up. So thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you downloading and listening to this show. Thank you all for your time and your attention. Don't forget, if you have something to contribute to the conversation, we're heading over to the Show Talk channel in the Discord server, and you can join us right there by becoming a supporting member at the deluxe level or better, patreon.com/the ADHD podcast. On behalf of Nikki Kinzer and Dr. Brandy Callahan, I'm Pete Wright, and we'll see you right back here next week on Taking Control, the ADHD podcast.